You have to leave. It's time for a recording. Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Breya, Ethereum Shaper, a 4-color artifact tokens deck. This is one of our donation decks of the week, and it comes from Izzy, who says, "Hi Cursed, Izzy again. I've been theorcrafting this Breya list for a while and I wanted to get your input on it. I'm going for more of a token strategy, but I also want to cheat big artifacts into play with stuff like Thopter Forgemaster. If possible, I'd like this deck to be able to do both. If not, I'm okay doing full tokens and saving other strategies for another deck. Right now the deck is under 300 USD. If we could keep it that way, I'd be very happy. Thanks again in advance." Thank you so much, Izzy, for supporting the channel and sending in the deck. I really do like it, and I have directions to go with it. I don't think we're going to have a budget problem. I do note it's $400 down here at the bottom, but maybe... Yeah, that's US dollars. I was wondering if it converted. So perhaps the deck has increased in price, but we'll keep things low. All right, let's look at our commander and get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Breya Ethereum Shaper, and why are they our 4-color artifact token commander? I really like when these little corners stay. I feel like maybe I should snip them off, but I won't. Breya is Breya is a legendary 4/4 artifact creature human. They have 2 abilities. The first one is when they ETB, they create 2 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. And then their second ability is by paying 2 and sacrificing 2 artifacts. Notably, you create 2 on ETB, so you already have that. Breya deals 3 damage to target player or planeswalker, or target creature gets -4/-4, or you gain 5 life. Breya is a very interesting commander. I find often, maybe just from my angle, is I use her more for the colors she provides than directly her ability. She's fun to blink because she creates Thopters every time, and her abilities are pretty modular. Being able to give something -4/-4 will kill most enemy commanders, and occasionally being able to burn opponents out is nice. The life gain is also sometimes useful, but probably the least useful of the bunch. Let's take a look at the deck. And right away, the first thing I want to point out is the combination of the deck being at 33 lands and the curve kind of topping off at 4 in a bit of a plateau between 3 and 4. Now, with our commander being at 4 mana and us running 33 lands, one of the first things I want to do is I want to cut back on the number of 4-drops, and I want to increase the number of lands. I will have other additions as well, but that's basically where I want to start. And before we go through our 4-drops, I wanted to point out that, so Izzy is asking if we should make this a cheat big artifacts into play. Now, I'm a simple man. I like cheating anything in play, and I think perhaps it's a bit too tunnel vision-y. Can you use that word like that? It's too much of a tunnel vision to look at this deck and say, I'm just going to throw out like giant artifacts, like we have here Wormcoil Engine and Cityscape Leveler, for example. And though these are good and we can cheat them out in several ways, to put more than these in, I think it's overkill, because half the time, let's look at Thopter Forgemaster, where you sacrifice 3 artifacts, tap this, and you basically put an artifact from your deck onto the battlefield. Half the time, it's not Cityscape Leveler that I want. It's more I want, Skull Clamp. It's more I want Time Sieve. It's more that I occasionally Chromatic Lantern, but most likely Ashnod's Altar, right? Or Simulacrum Synthesizer. Like, these are the artifacts I want to cheat out. It's really cool to cheat out the Cityscape Leveler and destroy something, and then, actually you can't even do that because it's on cast. So you have to wait for it to attack. Wow, I didn't even think of that. So yeah, generally I think I'm much more interested in cheating out the smaller plays. It's more the pulling them out of my deck that I'm more interested than the mana cheat, because I don't care. Like Skull Clamp, we're only reducing 1 mana to do this, but Skull Clamp is so good that I just want it on the battlefield basically every game, right? So that's kind of my opinion on that, but in the meantime, let's start off by looking at our 4-drops. So let's try to cut as much as we can. Breya obviously is our commander, we can't cut her. Jorah is a very powerful card and enables you to basically dig through your deck incredibly fast. I think I probably would like to have maybe one more mana reducer, but we're pretty close to running every single one of them. So I think overall, very, very good card to have. Master Transmuter is very interestingly a switch an artifact from play onto and your hand, and you basically swap them. I do like that. It allows us to rebuy certain artifacts, and it allows us to protect certain artifacts. So I think this is particularly good. Notably, returning an artifact to your hand is a part of the cost, so it cannot be interacted with. So I do like this. I will admit, though, this isn't a card that really gets me going. Like, the fact that she's 4 mana, wait a turn cycle, and then you have to tap her, pay a blue, and then you need something in your hand you want to put into play, doesn't really, like, appeal to me. But I will admit, the art goes hard. I love Esper. I hope one day we go back to Alara. Even though there's, like, nothing left to do on Alara, I just really like the vibe of Esper. It's a really cool part of the world, and so dark and awful to live in probably, but so beautiful at the same time. So I really do like the art. So for that reason alone, maybe keep it, but otherwise, not a card I'm incredibly impressed by. Likewise, Mechwood Bats. I know maybe this is close to blasphemy because this is like the token card, but I don't know if this is really something you care too much about. It's very, very fragile. It's hard to buy back. And even then, it is draining at maybe not the greatest rate. Like, this is a card that represents 2 to 3 damage, maybe in the early game, and then 4 to 6 damage in the late game per turn. Of course, unless you're going off with Time Sieve, and we'll get back to that at the end of this. But with that in mind, that's just not enough damage to do much other than, you know, paint a target on your back. These kind of decks have a really hard time actually getting to really high amounts of consistent damage. You're more of a combo deck or a engine deck to set up a tremendous amount of advantage and not necessarily a tremendous amount of damage. Those two things are a little different. With that in mind, this is a card that is more of a payoff late game and not so much an enabler in any way. And it being 4 mana being our commander, I'm none too impressed by it really. Going back to Time Sieve for a second, because I'm sure Time Sieve will come up a lot. There is I remember a clip of Aspiring Spike talking about Time Sieve in Modern, and people were asking what's the win con after you successfully Time Sieve turn after turn. And he replied with, that is the win con. And I'm very much so in agreement of this. When you have Time Sieve and you can use Time Sieve turn after turn without like reducing in resources, like basically staying at neutral, you've won the game. It doesn't matter what you win the game with. You don't need Mechwood Bats. You need like one unblocked creature who's a 1/1 flyer, and that's it, right? And most likely your opponents, if they don't have interaction, will concede on the spot anyways, so don't even worry about it. We don't need something like this. Moving forward, we also have Padum, Console of Innovation. This is another one I'm really unimpressed by, right? It's got 2 abilities. The first one is artifacts you control have hexproof, and the second one is if you have the highest mana value artifact, draw a card. And I'm going to suggest that both of these abilities individually are not worth 4 mana. Individually, they would probably be worth 2 and 3 each. And though I would agree that like putting 2 abilities together, putting these 2 abilities together and making it 4 mana is a reduction in mana, this last ability is just not very good. Like, I'm saying that this is a 3 mana ability if it's Phyrexian Arena. This is not Phyrexian Arena. This card is kind of worse than the sum of its parts, and the only perk of it being a creature is that it can block an attack, but you're not attacking with this creature, you're not blocking with this creature, and in fact, the board clears, which are the answer to all your things having hexproof, is a really good way to handle this card. So overall, Padum has never been a card that I've been particularly impressed by, and nothing's changed over the last few years. Solemn Simulacrum is a card that I am very particular with, and I've said this many times, and I'll say it many more. If you cannot cheat this card into play, if you cannot blink, if you cannot reanimate, if you cannot get multiple uses out of this, I do not like it. Now this one's close, because the last one that I didn't add, which I'm adding now, is that if you can do something with it being an artifact. So like, this is the deck to do that, but I don't think this is the deck to do that, honestly. Like, we are too low to the ground. We have much better cards and much more to do than to cheat one of our basics into play. Even if we reduce the mana cost on this card and bring it down to like 2 mana, which means we have 2 reducers, this is still equivalent basically to a mana rock until it dies. And then if you can't reanimate it, it wasn't worth it at all. So, oh yeah, and in that scenario, the mana rock would have been 0 mana, making it a mox. So the comparison is unfair, let's say. I think Solemn Simulacrum does not belong here, unfortunately. And though we do have blink mechanics with, let's see, we have Teleportation Circle, and we have at least Ephemerate, Eldrazi Displacer. I think these cards are just better used on so many other targets that, like, the idea of going turn 4, remember this interferes with Breya, turn 4 Teleportation Circle, turn 5 Solemn Simulacrum, end step Flicker Solemn. Like, is that really where you want to be? I'm not going to tell you it's not impressive, but not usually at a deck at this power level where like all your removal is 1 mana. You've got some really powerful interactions. You're trying to time sieve out your opponents. Like, I really don't think Solemn Simulacrum is where you want to be. Let's go back down the list. Urza is very strong and I think absolutely worth playing. Supreme Verdict is good, but we're rapidly reaching the point that maybe not good enough. I think because we're in 4 mana, we're in 4 colors, which makes this hard to cast. Something like Toxic Deluge might be better. One of those 5 mana wraths might be fine. Organic Extinction might be good enough by itself. I just think it's rare for you to want to wipe the board, so therefore having just like 1 board wipe might be enough. Toxic Deluge would probably be the best, which let's actually see what Toxic Deluge is at this point, and it's only a few bucks because it just got reprinted. I think safely I could say Toxic Deluge is just the superior version of this ability. I love Supreme Verdict, but I just don't think this is the time for it. Thousand Moon Smithy is a card that's kind of difficult to deal with. I do appreciate that it creates a construct in a way, and oops, I want to flip it. It has a pretty interesting backside to it that allows you to basically construct another turn every time you use this mana. I don't know if it's worth the effort of both having a 4 mana cast and then having this ability trigger. Don't get me wrong, if you have 5 untapped artifacts, I'm ignoring the creature bit for a second. To do this, your constructs are at least 6/6s when they come into play, if not bigger, and that's pretty impressive. But even then, I'm just not really impressed by this at this mana cost. Maybe if we had cut everything else and gone up to like 36, 37 lands so we can guarantee playing this card a lot more often, you know, maybe I'll like that a little more, but at the moment, I just don't think it's good enough. I think just in comparison to something like the Synthesizer, you can tell the difference with the sheer power of the 2 cards, and so I'm a lot more keen on the 3 mana version. I will note that I am taking out a bunch of cards that always trigger Synthesizer, and maybe that's something worth considering. But I'm gonna let you in on a little secret when I deck build, is that's a second draft worry. I tend to build from the heart, and that means I'm going to make all of my changes, and then the next draft I'm gonna pick up the deck as if I hadn't seen it before. And just because I don't want to take Synthesizer out now doesn't mean I won't want to take it out in the future. So just keep that in mind as you listen to my advice. Looking at our enchantments, Phyrexian Scriptures stands out as being incredibly strange here. I think it is a bad board clear already. I don't want it to be, and it's already clunky, adding in the 4 mana. I just don't really think this is a good card. I would rather a board clear that happens immediately, not imminently. I don't want my opponents to have time to make decisions, to interact with Phyrexian Scriptures, or to plan otherwise a way to make more non-artifact creatures, right? I'd rather this be, once again, Toxic Deluge or just removed for a land. Reconnaissance Mission feels strange here. It is a very good ability, don't get me wrong. I think I'd just rather it be something else. Even with the cycling attached to this is kind of a clunky card. I tend to not like playing it, even in like my black-blue Pirates deck. I'm keeping it in there because the ceiling is high, and the ceiling is definitely higher there than it is here. Here, don't get me wrong, we could have like 10 Thopters, cast this, attack someone, and draw 10. But that's still rather clunky for the times that it doesn't do anything, the times it gets removed, the times when we don't have a board, and the times we're walled out from our opponents. So that in mind, I would rather this just be a 4-mana draw card, 3-mana draw card, something just that has an immediate effect. And I think, considering I have to assume it's not in here, where are our instants? I think this would be better off to be an old favorite of mine, Rowan's Grim Search. Not only does this work both with artifacts and with, but also tokens, so generally you're going to get more use out of it, and the ability to look at the top, what is it, 6? Yeah, the top 6 if you need to grab something is much, much better, and of course the instant speed. So that would be a 1-for-1 change for me, but I'll leave that to you. Storm the Vault is a card that always confuses me, and I'm going to leave this maybe for other players to maybe chime in, or maybe just for the deck builder to decide, but I don't like this card because you do not have the choice to flip it. And I know that's pretty silly because on the backside it's Tolarian Academy, where you can add blue for each artifact, which represents like 8 to 10 mana, let's say conservatively, but Storm the Vault's ability to generate treasure tokens, I actually value more than the Tolarian Academy ability. Like, not only do they both generate mana, is the first thing. Oh wait, this is 1 per player. Oh, I thought this was Old Gnawbone. Okay, that really changes what I want to do here. Sorry, my other cat couldn't decide whether he wanted to stay inside or go out. Storm the Vault, okay, with the idea that this front half isn't as good, the back half gets a lot better. And maybe you keep this for redundancy, but I'm going to offer something that works similarly and doesn't cost 4. So I'll leave this up to you. I'm not very sold on it, and maybe I know someone in the comments will tell me how great of a card this is, so I'll leave this up. On the other hand, Thopter Spy Network is a weird combination of the other 2 cards. It generates 1/1/1 flyer on your upkeep, and then per player, once again, you hit per combat, you draw a card. So Reconnaissance Mission is way better, right? Like, Reconnaissance Mission is per creature, and so that part is beaten by Reconnaissance Mission, and Thopter Spy Network's first ability is awful, right? Like, it's 1/1/1 per turn cycle. That's just really, really bad. So this is another card that's just worse than the sum of its parts, and considerably so. So with that in mind, if I wasn't gonna run the previous one, which is Storm, if I wasn't gonna run Reconnaissance Mission, and I had my doubts of Storm the Vault, I absolutely do not want to play Thopter Spy Network. All right, looking through, let me see what else I can find that I have some opinions on. Let's see. So Chromatic Lantern is a crutch here, and we're going to talk more about mana rocks in a second, but it's a necessary evil with the mana base that we have. It's just important to note that as we are able to fix the mana base, this does have to eventually leave, or let me rephrase, you get to eventually take this card out, which is really, really good because it's a pretty bad card most of the time. Until then, I think it's fine. If you are with friends who would let you play proxies, I would just do that. But considering you're worrying about budget, I don't think that's the case. However, at the moment, I think Chromatic Lantern is good, but the second you feel like you can play without it, you should toss it out. As I said, talking about mana rocks, we have the Talisman Cycle here, in addition to, let's see, an Arcane Signet. Now, what am I going to say about these? I'm going to say I don't really like them, is the big thing, right? I almost prefer the Signets here because the Signets allow for different mana colors and different combinations of mana, but honestly, I don't like either of these very much. Mana rocks are not lands, and right now these mana rocks are making up for the fact that you're low on lands, and that is not a good one-for-one trade. You need the lands for the mana rocks. I don't feel like I need to explain this. You want lands first and mana rocks second. So if you can't find, in addition to the additions I will present, room for lands, these should be cut for lands. I know it doesn't feel good. It goes against the idea of the format. I know to an extent these can maybe create a turn 3 Breya, but I'm going to suggest those aren't good enough reasons. Notably, the talismans are very bad at casting Breya on turn 2. Oh, sorry, on turn 3. What would you need? You would need like 3 duels, none of them realistically 2 duels and like a basic. None of them come in tapped, and you need the talisman that's the correct option in order to get that 4 exact mana. I just don't think it's reasonable to be casting Breya on turn 4 often. Yeah, so I don't really love them, but I will leave that to you. I would be probably okay with you leaving 1 or 2 each, and that wouldn't be too bad. Last few cards I want to pick on. Once again, maybe artifact players can come and fight me. I don't like Sai. I really, really don't like Sai. And maybe I just need to play with Sai more, but this is a card that sets you up to be weak to board clears. And I know this is kind of like a dice to removal argument. Like, yeah, of course, board clears kill creatures. Everyone knows this. But Sai is a card that incentivizes your opponents to prepare for and build towards board clears. And the general way you're going to get these artifacts outside of these artifacts is these artifact creatures here. So you are overextending with a creature that basically encourages you to overextend. Following up on that, its ability to sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card is kind of the answer to that board clear, but it requires you to have a tremendous amount of mana to meaningfully sacrifice all your creatures. I just don't see it. I don't know. I'm not gonna lie. You can keep Sai. I just don't like Sai. I feel that they are a very, very weak card in comparison to his peers, which are like Emery, so much more powerful. Looking at our high mana cards, I just want to talk about the last 3. Cyberdrive Awakener. Something people keep forgetting about this card, I feel at least, that it's only affecting non-creature artifacts and doesn't turn your creature artifacts into 4/4s, which kind of limit the power it can have. Don't get me wrong, if you have enough like treasure tokens, clue tokens, food tokens, this can be good, but your general like amount of creature like tokens you create are 1/1 servos or 1/1 Thopters, which means they don't turn into 4/4s, which makes this a lot weaker. And even then, looking at this, like if we take out the mana rocks, they get worse, but also, are you attacking with Skull Clamp? No. Are you attacking with Soul Ring? No. Are you attacking with Ashnod's Altar, Time Sieve? No. So even if we like look at our artifact, non-creature artifacts, I just don't think this is a meaningful card that does a lot of damage. If you were deep into clues or food, I would change my mind. And I think that first line of text where they all get flying is okay, but generally negligible. Maybe I just am expecting a lot more flyers these days than there are, but the evasion of it is meaningful when you have like 50 clue tokens and less meaningful when you have a bunch of talismans and artifacts you're not going to attack with. Wormcoil Engine, likewise, also a card, and I'm naming these cards because they're high on budget, but I think they're low on value. Wormcoil Engine is the other card that I generally think we could do better. I know this is a classic, I know it's great, but it's a lot of mana in our 33 land deck, and are you really going to be cheating Wormcoil Engine into play? I don't know if you are, so I'll leave that up to you to decide because it is a very cool card, but I think this is generally one of the weaker finishers you have access to. All right, let's go to additions. Goblin Bombardment is a card that I think is notably missing here. With your ability, like I said, to pump out artifact creature tokens at a fast rate, and already your idea of impact tremors being very, very powerful here, I think you're already in a very good position to be capitalizing on these artifact creatures, and I would like you to capitalize more. Impact Tremors and the other card, Okay, he does want to leave. That's 2 for 2, eh? You wanna go 2? I'll let you go. So Impact Tremors and War Leader's Call they stack really, really well on ETBs, and I want something just on the other side, and Goblin Bombardment does that. Right, the thing I wanted to say is that this does not... So Impact Tremors are good against players, Goblin Bombardment is good against creatures and planeswalkers. These allow you to burn out certain like specific hate pieces or kill commanders and the like, which is rather important, I think. Speaking of mana, we weren't speaking of it, but I'm thinking of it. Archway of Innovation is an MH3 card that I think is very powerful, with the main thing that says the next spell you have you cast this turn has Improvise. And I think this is just really powerful, and you'll be happy to get this out into play often. It's also 60 cents. That's stupid. Okay, it's 60 cents. Definitely pick this up. I think this card is going to be very powerful. It will sometimes enter the battlefield tapped, but I think you'll be very happy with this. Do note that this won't cast your commander very well. It will pay for command tax, but that's it. But generally you want to use this on your bigger artifact spells, or occasionally, you know, casting your 3 mana artifacts. If you think about it in the way that you're turning 1 mana, so this is basically tap 1 for this and add a blue, so you're tapping 2 lands. If you cast something 3 mana or higher, you are getting an advantage, and after that, it does kind of, like below that, it's not worth playing. So this is a card that you can really think about for if you want to put higher mana cards in, because I do think your 5 slot is rather open. Yeah, your 5 and 6 slot are rather open, so there are options there should you choose to do so. It also can cast Clodrotha, it's not Rebirth, it can cast the Forged Master pretty easily, and I think that is nice. Another MH3 card is Refurbished Familiar. This card is very impressive, and I think you'll be very happy casting it for 1 black mana. Discarding 3 cards and having a flying attacker is pretty good. And if you sacrifice it, you're pretty fine with it, and if you blink it, wow, you're in business. So I think this card is very good, especially in Commander, so you're going to be happy with it. Before we go back to MH3 in a second, Marinette Master feels like it's very much so missing in this deck. This is possibly the best artifact Blood Artist ability, as it says whenever an artifact dies, you deal 3 damage to 1 opponent. 4 damage because it's Fabricate 3 onto itself. For what it's worth, you can fabricate servos into play, but generally having Marinette Master as a 4/6 is way more important and threatens that if you have a bunch of treasure tokens or Ashnod's Altar and a bunch of servos, that you could burn any player out at any time. I used this on Muds's channel with Breya not long ago, and the ability to hold up, I think it was like 8 to 10 treasure, and Marinette Master at 4, threatening that if anyone tries to do something against me, I can just knock them out of the game, was really powerful for 2 to 3 turns until they realized they'd have to fall on the sword and started sacrificing themselves to try to stop me, which they couldn't in the end. Back to MH3, Marinette Apprentice. This is where we all start, and this is a pretty good one. In general. Once again, blinking this creature is very valuable as it creates 1/1s, and unlike the Master, it doesn't care about their power. So you can generally just use this to create a servo every time you blink, but generally the ability to pseudo Blood Artist your opponents by making them lose 1 life. You don't gain any life, but lose 1 life whenever something dies is really good and pays off really well. Like, think of this in comparison to Sai, right? Sai sets up a board to be board cleared, and Marinette Apprentice says, yeah, wipe the board. You guys are going to take a ton of damage in the meantime, and I'm going to be able to rebuild later with you guys on the back foot because of that damage. So I think this is much better and lower mana. Speaking of higher mana and more MH3, Crabbomin is the coolest card I've ever seen, and unfortunately doesn't say each opponent, so it doesn't get better outside of a 1-on-1, but is still a very strong card. Emerge from Artifact is incredibly powerful, and its ability to at least go neutral by exiling a card from your opponent's hand into positive, depending what you get out of the exchange to cast for free, is really, really good. Do note you have to decide who to target, and you want to target the opponent who is the most mid-range or, big mana, so you can get the most out of it. But if you're playing with a pod of generally good players with strong decks, you will always get a pretty good hit. Coming to the end, I want to talk a little bit about Recursion. Unearth is really accessible here, but the main two I want to talk about are Jolted Awake and Jailbreak. So Unearth and Jolted Awake are very, very similar. They both have Cycling 2. They're both a 1-mana reanimation card. And Unearth is basically a cornerstone generally of good engine decks because it will bring back a lot of your relevant creatures that you need to go off. But Jolted Awake is that, but a little better. See, the downside is you're not an energy deck, so you can only pick something that's 2 mana or less, but any artifact is the part that is more important. So this means it grabs Skull Clamp, this means it grabs your talismans, in addition to grabbing all your 2 mana creatures. And I think that's very, very much so worthwhile. Also, still having the cycling, I think, is rather good. Jailbreak, on the other hand, is a card I almost universally suggest in these kind of decks because it is really, really good and at worst can be used as a land ramp card if you have a fetch land in the graveyard, which we don't have fetch lands, but I think it's still worth considering. Once again, this card's ability to pull back from the graveyard anything from Ashnod's Altar to Skull Clamp to any of your enchantments, any planeswalkers, anything like that, is something that's really, really powerful. In exchange, because you pick the card in your opponent's graveyard, you often can pick the least impactful or the most divisive for your other opponent's card from your opponent's graveyard, or you can make a political play and tell an opponent, I'll give you this back if you, don't mess with me for a while. For those who don't know, don't tell them you have Jailbreak. Just tell them, hey, if I reanimate your, your Titan, would you leave me alone for a while? And if they say yes, you reanimate their Titan, let's say Grave Titan, and you get any 6 mana or less card back from your graveyard, permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's a huge win. And if you're like me, you play with people who honor their deals, so it'll work out very, very well. Finally, the last card I wanted to suggest is Warnog. Warnog feels very much so like they belong in this deck. I've played a lot of different Warnog builds with Blink in them, so the Blink that you have is already very good, but Warnog's ability to just generate clues is really, really nice. Do note, I have not had an opponent generate a clue in the last 8 games I've played a Warnog. Nobody does it. Everyone just takes the 1 damage over generating a clue, and it only happens when someone is particularly behind or particularly ahead and thinks they can get away with it. And don't get me wrong, you're generally happy with that extra clue, but getting 1 extra clue is just fine. Obviously, because this is enters or leaves, it is very, very good with your Blink abilities, but otherwise it is a card that I think you'll be pretty happy with generally. And as you saw before, we have a bunch of really cheap reanimation that you can play with this card. Yes, and the final card I wanted to point out was Smothering Ti. Now, if you watch my channel regularly, you know I do not like suggesting cards of this power and or price because they're pretty divisive and nobody needs me to tell them that Smothering Tithe is good. However, Smothering Tide is noticeably missing from this list, and this list would very much so enjoy playing Smothering Tide. And if I were to be, a bit direct, you can take that price out of Cyberdrive and Wormcoil Engine to add up to the cost of Smothering Tithe. And Smothering Tithe is way better than those cards. Otherwise, I just wanted to lay it out there for anyone who has maybe less budget concerns to consider it if they are building this exact list. I'm not even going to explain it. You know this card is good. It's a great card. And that's all I have for this deck. This deck is very, very cool. I do love the token side to it, and I didn't really make this into the cheating out big artifacts deck. And what I would say to that is I would suggest that if that is the direction you would like to go in, perhaps a power level discussion is to be considered. Because I'm not sure what artifacts you're hoping to cheat into play, but there's very few that have that power level that will, keep up with a deck that has a bunch of 1 mana removal, wants to time sieve out their opponents, etc., etc. I think maybe the best one would be Portal to Phyrexia, Is that the right one? The one from Brothers War that will each opponent sacrifices creatures, and you get to reanimate an artifact every turn cycle. Very, very strong, but honestly probably not even necessary in the current build. So maybe think of it in different colors, a different deck entirely, but at the moment I think as a token deck it does very, very well. I hope this video was helpful to you. Thank you so much for sending the deck, Izzy. I am very much so appreciative, and good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.